On that, it's quite a long story as to why I wound up where I did. My father wanted me to enroll at Texas A&M, and I didn't want to be an Aggie. And he kept sending me over, and I never enrolled. And finally, I was a student at Stephen F. Austin, a small college just 20 miles away. And frankly, my goal in life was to become a better calf roper. And my father didn't see much of a future in calf ropers. And so he wanted me to go to A&M and become an engineer like one of his nephews, my cousin. And so he came upon the idea, we compromised. I said, "Dad, I'll go to A&M, and if you'll let me take my roping horse with me." And so he agreed. And so when he delivered me and the horse on the campus, he rolled, it was way back in the 1950s now, he rolled down the window in the car and leaned out and said, "Become a mechanical engineer." And I did exactly what he told me. And I graduated in 1954. The Korean War was over in 1953, but the Lufkin, and at the time, there was compulsory military service for young men. And so the Lufkin Draft Board didn't forget me, and they drafted me in October 1954 and sent me to Alaska. When I got out of the Army, a combination of events led me to accept a job from Shell Oil Company. I was assigned as a unit engineer in the Garza and Borden counties of West Texas. And in that day and age, the Shell engineer was a kind of a universalist, a kind of a manager. And he was responsible, or she was responsible for all the problems that came up in that geographical area. So I did things like design tank batteries and built low water crossings and made drilling AFEs. And so that was the kind of job that I had. It wasn't very technical. And frankly, I hated it. I didn't really enjoy it. So I resigned from Shell and went back to Texas A&M and enrolled and to get my master's degree in mathematics. When I got out of school, I had a job offer from Shell. John Payne was a recruiter, and he offered me a job to work in the Shell laboratory in research in a new specialty that they had created called production engineering. And so I decided to take Shell's offer and become a researcher in the Shell Exploration and Production Laboratory in Houston. And so that's where I went and had a long career there. I had some ideas while an Aggie student the second time around that changed my life. I had some professors that I got to know as friends, and they designed a curriculum for me to turn a frustrated engineer into a mathematician. And I remember taking a differential equations course from Dr. Basye, B-A-S-Y-E. And I noticed in the appendix of that differential equation text was a story about some British physicians who were using Fourier analysis to help them analyze human electrocardiograms. And I stored that away in my memory. And later I became a Shell researcher. And that was, I'd held that thought the whole time, and out of that idea that I got at A&M I developed what is called now the shell diagnostic technique, where you can take measurements on the surface and figure out what's happening at the downhole pump thousands of feet down. And it struck me that that was much like a human electrocardiogram that I had read about in that differential equations textbook, where in the case of the oil well, the downhole pump was the heart. And in the case of electrocardiograms, your heart beats because of tiny little signals, electrical signals that originate in your body, causing your heart to beat. And these signals travel through your tissue to the surface of your skin, where you can measure these little electrical currents and record them on a strip chart. And then the doctor would take this electrocardiograph and use Fourier series and to get the maximum amount of information out of the electrocardiogram. Well, it struck me that the analogy between the oil well and the electrocardiogram was perfect. There you had the pump at the bottom of the well, had valves in it that opened and closed. Loads were put on and removed from the pump, and these propagated to the surface through the rod string, just like the little electrical circuits, currents in the human propagated through bodily tissue to the surface. Well, these stresses that were put on and taken off of the downhole pump propagated to the surface through the rod string, where they could be measured non-invasively with a dynamometer at the top of the rod string, and then you could apply, I chose to use a classical mathematical solution based on Fourier analysis, just like I'd learned in Dr. Basie's course, and that was one of the things that changed my life. Before that, if you let me continue with the work there at Shell Development, before that, I thought of Dr. Luther's lectures on solution of the wave equation, which is a partial differential equation with partial difference equations. There's a story there too. On the day that he said that crucial thing that helped to change my life, I really wanted to play golf with my friends and cut class, but I didn't. Thank goodness I didn't cut class. So I got to hear his lecture on a numerical solution of the partial differential equation called the wave equation with using finite differences, partial difference equations. And there was a property of the finite difference solution which said you can get an exact solution to the wave equation regardless of the length of your spatial increment. That's fancy talk for how long, how big a lumps you cut the rod string up into when you solve the predictive problem. So I remembered that. And so that was the first thing I did at Shell Development. I built a mathematical model of the pumping system with the hope of giving the world a new way of designing rod pumping installations. But I hung up on simulating the downhole pump. That was part of the mathematical model. I couldn't figure out, I didn't know any way to predict when the valves on the pump would open and close, and there was no way for me to, I just couldn't figure that out. And finally it dawned on me, since I can't figure out a priori, or I can't figure out beforehand when these valves will open and close, I'll figure it out during the solution as I go. And so it was easy to do because of the finite difference solution. I would just keep track of the position of the pump and act accordingly. And so that completed it. I solved the problem with partial difference equations like Dr. Luther had taught me at Aggieland, and Shell prepared a program based on this mathematical model And soon they began designing pumping installations with the wave equation. That happened in about, I would say, October of 1960, and I just started to work at Shell Development in August. So that took me August, September, part of October, and I had that, and then I developed this diagnostic technique between that time and the end of 1960. So my friend, his name is Ken Nolan, I met him in, I guess 1965. Ken and I had this mutual interest of making the diagnostic technique better. I got the wanderlust, and I decided to leave Shell, form my own company, and so I formed NABLA Corporation. And I thought of my friend Ken Nolan. I called him up. He joined me. And the first thing we did at NABLA was to put the diagnostic technique in a truck, in a computer, and haul it to the well site and do the computations right there on site, so we could hand the customer the diagnosis with a completed report right at the well site. Before that, application of the diagnostic technique was very cumbersome and inefficient. Some people from the lab would load all this up, the dynamometer and some tools and cheater pipes and sucker rod clamps, all the things that you'd need to weigh a well, as we called it, and they'd fly to an oil field, and they'd put this dynamometer on, and they'd get some data, and they would take this strip chart and manually pick off points and write them down on a yellow tablet, load versus time and position versus time manually, and they'd dial up somebody back at the lab and read them the data over the phone, and that person would copy them down again, and then go to the computer laboratory and punch up, quote, IBM cards, and run those through the SS-80 UNIVAC mainframe computer and solve the problem, and it would get the output in terms of the coordinates of this downhole pump card, and so the laboratory representative of the team would plot these points on graph paper manually, make the diagnosis, call up the people in the oil field and tell them what the well was doing. Now, how inefficient then can that be? And yet, it worked. But that could never be a practical method because it was so labor intensive. Hewlett-Packard told us that we were the first people to put a small computer in a truck and haul it to the well, haul it anywhere over bouncy roads. They'd had small computers put in their planes, but never in trucks. So that was the way we were to make our living. We were operating under a Shell license on the diagnostic technique, and we were offering this service to industry. But we also did a lot of other things. We carried the predictive program. By this time, Shell and the rest of the world were using the solution for the wave equation with partial difference equations. I've told you that story. But we carried that much further. We taught our version of the wave equation design program. But the main thing that we taught it was taught the world how to design deviated wells. And nowadays the rage is horizontal wells, and all wells have to be deviated before they can become horizontal. And so that was done, I think, in 1992. I would say that it's pretty clear that producing horizontal wells has changed the industry dramatically. When Ken and I went to Midland back in the very late 69, I went in 69, he came in 70. Proration was being ended by proration, I mean that the Texas Railroad Commission would tell operators in Texas that they can produce a well only 8 or 10 days a month or something like that. It all started with the discovery of the East Texas field, where there was a glut of oil. Oil was selling at 10 cents a barrel. And so they created this proration thing to limit the supply and have the prices up to where the people could make a living at it. And but proration was ending in 1970, and everyone expected that it would cause, when it was ended, that there would be a jump in production in the United States. Because doesn't it make sense that if you can produce a well every day of the month, it put more oil in the tank than if you could only produce it 12 days a month? But that jump didn't happen. In fact, pretty soon after proration was ended, production began to decline. And it continued to decline for 20+ years, and we saw it happen. In the United States, production was declining steadily until just in the last few years, something happened, and that something was that some people, far-sighted people, saw how develop ways of drilling horizontally through shale, usually shale, that evidently was the source rock for all the oil that has been produced so far. But that shale still contains a lot of oil, untold trillions of oil around the world in shales. And then the fracturing processes where you can make multiple fractures along the length of that horizontal, it's called a lateral. Many, many times these fractures will allow oil to come in from the shale along the length of the lateral. And your production can be much greater than if you only penetrated the reservoir here and oil came in just from one level in a radial flow kind of fashion. And that involves the deviated well technology to get to the horizontal. And so clearly, and that's made the United States a world power in energy again. And we were fast becoming, well, we've been dependent on other sources of oil for decades, but now we're again a major producer and growing every year of hydrocarbons, both gas and oil, from these shales. They're in Texas, they're on the East Coast, they're in North Dakota, they're everywhere, all through the world. And so that's the biggest thing that's happened to the oil industry. It's incredible, the changes that it's caused. One of them that we West Texans are so conscious of is how much water it takes to frack a well. And progress is being made, but freshwater supplies in West Texas are very, very limited, and in the world. You know, water has to be more valuable than oil in the world. There's a worldwide shortage of water. So we have to get more supplies, desalinization perhaps of seawater, and reclaiming water that has been used for frack purposes and not using fresh water. And all companies are working hard on that, and they need, that's a big problem. And there's not a perfect solution that I know of yet, but it needs to be worked on. And there are the deep water challenges. Who knows how much oil is available in the deep oceans, and those are really difficult jobs, and great progress has been made where they can produce in thousands of feet of ocean water And I would say the problem remains to educate the public. Most citizens of our country really don't know much about the oil industry, and there needs to be increased efforts in communicating what we're all about to the nation and to the world. The U.S. Congress does not know much about what the oil industry does. They know how important it is, but they really don't understand the details, and so they need to be educated along with John Q. Public. The benefits of working for the oil industry are many in number. One thing, I just had a good job. I was well paid, either as a Shell employee or as from my own company, and it's just strictly I had a good job, and I could give to charities, my universities, my church, things like that, and I wouldn't have been able to do that had I not been associated with a vital industry like the oil industry. It's been very satisfying from a personal standpoint. I've had a certain amount of success, and I've met a lot of wonderful people, and they're still friends. Many of them have gone on, and it's a chance to give back something. And the greatest enjoyment that I have as a result of working in the oil industry were the people that I met and the memories that I made, and they're priceless, and they're dear possessions for an old 82-year-old man.